Hello and welcome back to another IATEFL live chat. I'm joined in the studio by Willoughby and Mel Lamb. Hello ladies, how are you both?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Ree.
Yeah,
Mel?
it's not bad. Great conference.
Yeah, you enjoying it?
Yeah, absolutely.
This isn't your first time, is it, by any stretch of the imagination?
No, I don't recall how many IATEFLs I've been to, but yeah, I'm always delighted to be here.
Many. Okay. Ladies, let's start by where do you work and what's been your journey in ELT so far?
Well, we both work at International House London, and I started off doing a CELTA there back in the day, 1998, and I then worked in China for about 4.5 years, came back to IH London, and yeah, I've been there more or less with a couple of sabbaticals ever since. And I did my CELTA in Dublin in 2000, and I worked in Ireland for a bit, and Spain for a bit, back home in New Zealand for a bit, and then I've been in London for a long time now. I'm not sure how long, and I don't really want to think about it, to be honest. And we both work as teachers and teacher trainers on CELTA and Delta courses, and I also work on the MA at King's.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yeah.
Lovely. So mainly teacher training.
Yes.
Okay. And was that the impetus for the talk that you gave yesterday afternoon at the conference?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, so your talk was called Work It Out for Yourselves.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me more. Where did it come from? What was it about?
Yeah, mainly it came from the fact that about 3 or 4 years ago, we started flipping the CELTA. So we took away all the input so that the trainees could do their planning together and with us, and maybe teaching rehearsals, that kind of stuff together and with us. And all the input happens at home, online, so to speak. And I was lucky enough to work on a couple of flipped courses, and through that, I realized that I didn't actually know what happened in a planning workshop. I didn't understand how it was different from the more standard approaches to helping trainees plan. And so luckily working with Mel, I eventually worked out what they were. And so our talk was really, what is a planning workshop? What's the aim of it? And then some techniques, tasks you can give trainees to help them become more effective and more autonomous planners of lessons.
Okay, before we talk more about the planning in the workshop, I was just kind of wondering, it's a big step to flip the CELTA because it's always traditionally been input sessions, teaching practice. Did you notice a change in the progress of the trainees when you flipped the CELTA by having input? Was it videos online?
It was mostly written material, so they were reading stuff. There were some clips. There are some clips in that, mainly because on an intensive CELTA, you haven't got time to watch all the video content, so they need to be able to scan something quite quickly for what they need. I suppose one of the biggest differences was that trainees become more confident about what they're teaching because they're reading, say, content about receptive skills if they're teaching a receptive skills lesson, or they're reading content about grammar if they're teaching a grammar lesson. So they're reading about what they need for their next lesson. And that obviously then that, with the opportunity to discuss their lessons with each other and to give it a go before they teach, leads to a lot more confidence to try things out.
This is, lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with all of that.
So not only was it kind of put online, but you also tailored it to what they were teaching that day. So they would read about grammar or watch about, reading, listening, if that's what they were teaching, rather than doing a universal input for everybody. Okay. So your workshop was about planning. How does the planning differ on a normal kind of that's the wrong word, isn't it? The unflipped CELTA to a flipped CELTA?
So in my experience, most planning is done by the trainees at home, and then during the day you might have a half-hour slot for supervised lesson planning, where trainees ask you questions as a tutor, and we encourage them to work together, but they don't really work together particularly well because they all want their individual questions answered.
Of course.
And it's very pressured for the trainers,
I don't feel like I do a particularly good job in answering all of their questions. And it can be quite frustrating for trainees as well, particularly the quieter, more reticent ones. So that's that. And then in the planning workshop, the impetus to answer those questions isn't on us as trainers. Instead, they collaborate together to resolve any puzzles that they have.
And so you actively step back and tell them this is between you guys, and you're just kind of like the guide that wanders around? Or do you step back totally?
We step back totally, but what we provide them with is a planning strategy. So here's a set of steps to go through together with your critical friend. So for example, if I've got a lesson tomorrow, right, and I've got this controlled practice and I have no idea what to do with it, right? I've looked at it, I've planned it as much as I can, but I come in to, the planning workshop just going, I don't know what to do with it. So then the trainer will put up a series of steps to kind of help me maybe get a little further along. I do the task, and Mel would be my critical friend. She's asking me questions, prompting, challenging assumptions that I've made about things. So my questions are resolved through the interaction I have with my colleague.
And in terms of our role there as the trainer in the room, you're just sort of like monitoring like you would a normal English language class and seeing where people get stuck. You might then push in another prompt or a question to get them talking again, that kind of thing.
And how long does it take before they stop kind of relying on you? Because I can imagine initially they must be like, I can't do this, you tell us what to do. How long does it take? I mean, does that happen? And is there a point at which they let go?
I think it happens quite quickly. I mean, it does depend on the person. Some people want you as the trainer kind of to green light things. But because after they've done this, they have a fairly solid reflection stage where they identify what they've done, how it's helpful, how they'll use the strategy in the future. I think because that is made very explicit, they can see the benefit of it quite quickly. I mean, I didn't find that people really relied on us very much.
Particularly on like a pre-service course like the CELTA, where they don't know any different. So if you set it up, this is what we're doing. We have these planning workshops. In these workshops, this is your role, this is your role. Then they kind of take to it like a duck to water. I think when we've done it on a Delta course where they've perhaps been on a more traditional pre-service course initially, it takes a little bit more of an adjustment to think, well, actually, I can work with my colleague to work all this out. Yeah.
I can imagine, because I mean, certainly I know that from my experience, the trainees are very much reliant on the tutor and they want the green light, like, oh, is this the right thing to do? How do you react to trainees that might say that the planning isn't of super importance, that they don't need to write such a detailed plan, and that why can't they just jot down some bullet points?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it, again, comes out of the reflection, that idea of, what does this process bring you as a teacher? How do you feel about the lesson now where you didn't before? I would say that most teachers, and we got the trainees on the last course to talk together about what they learned from the planning workshops, and they were saying that actually doing language analysis they found really helpful. Procedure pages less helpful, but they understood that it was showing their process and their that it's part of the assessment as well. So
I think also that there's sort of a separation of two things. So one is like lesson preparation, which is what's happening in the planning workshops, and the other is filling in the documentation, which can be a massive trial. And I don't blame them for having all or any of those feelings. And so in the planning workshops, we're looking on preparing aspects of your lesson, maybe one task, maybe how you're going to put things on the board, that kind of thing. And I think in my experience, the trainees see the immediate relevance of that, particularly because they're the ones that come in with the puzzle. I don't know what to put on the board. That's your puzzle. you work it out with your partner. You at the end, you take a picture of what you're going to put on the board, and Bob's your uncle.
And how long do you allow for the planning workshop? How much time do they spend on this?
A good hour to an hour and a half. I think more time in the beginning because you're teaching them the strategies. And then as the course goes on, so in the second week, they have access to a range of different strategies. You don't need to guide them through it quite so much. So they just tell their critical friend where they're up to, what their puzzle is, choose the appropriate strategy, and work through it together. So they need a little bit less time to move forward in their preparation.
And has your observation been that the standard of planning is the same compared with the normal course where perhaps you might plan with them a bit more?
My experience is there's just a more confidence walking into the lesson because there's a deeper understanding of what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it and how you're going to go about doing it. So which I think tends to lead to better reflection after the lesson because they've got a better understanding of why they were doing things. They weren't just told, no, do it this way. They're after the lesson, they're able to think in more depth about, why something worked or didn't work or how they might adjust it next time because they've already got to that deeper level of understanding.
And in my experience, so in my experience, what I found is they made changes to the coursebook material a lot more quickly, a lot more confidently, and they experimented with different techniques and ideas a lot earlier on in the course. So that's really nice. They didn't have that kind of slavishly following the coursebook idea, which a lot of initial or novice teachers do.
Yes, naturally.
There's a lot more ownership as well as a result, because all of the decision making has essentially been made by the teacher, and they've got a helper in that process, and they can decide whether to adopt that idea or not, or tweak it or not. But there's less of the because they've made the decisions themselves, they've got more ownership over what they're doing. And again, I think that just leads to a level of confidence. Yeah.
And do you have any control over who works with whom? So is it that you'll put, for example, a less experienced trainee with a more experienced one, or two of the same level together? Does that play a role?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the beginning, when we're still getting to know them, we kind of try combinations to see things out. But also we think about, what lesson have you taught? So if you've done like a grammar lesson yesterday, and that person is teaching a grammar lesson tomorrow, then maybe that person is really well placed to help as the critical friend. So we kind of think about it before we group, and often have quite lengthy discussions about how we're going to pair up the trainees to get the most out of the planning sessions.
But I mean, it's fantastic as well because they're learning from one another. It's the the social way of doing it. So that, it's bringing everything to the table possible. If people are watching at home and are wondering, how can I start doing this, perhaps on a teacher training course with my trainees, what advice would you give them?
I would start by possibly making a list of the key common questions that come up all the time in planning that you always have to answer. So ones like, what do I put on the board? There's too much material. What can I cut out?
What does this word mean?
What does this word mean? How do I help students with pronunciation? Make a list of those. Choose the first one, and then think about what you do as an experienced teacher or what you used to do. Break it down into the stages.
And then you've got a strategy.
That I would then experiment with a colleague, a critical friend, and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, no, I think that sounds reasonable, doesn't it? I think the answers to the questions that the trainees have are really obvious to us as trainers. And that means we kind of forget that behind our answer, there's a whole load of working out that you have to do in order to get there. And it really is about analysing and slowing down your own thought processes so that you can put them on paper for somebody to follow as a process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, because we really do. We know it. We've done it so many times that we forget what it's like to be at the beginning. And I think with the planning workshop, allowing the trainees to talk to each other, they can go through the steps together that we may forget to go through because we think it's obvious. And so, yes, it can lead to more effective planning. This is fantastic. Okay. Well, have you guys got anything else that you're working on at the moment? Any more projects in the pipeline?
Well, we're working at International House on producing a new set of teacher training films.
Oh, lovely.
Which is quite exciting. So that's one of the big projects that I'm involved in at the moment.
And I am going to start soon investigating helping trainees develop their language sensitivity. So not language awareness, but kind of being a bit more sensitive. At the moment, we're getting a lot of people who haven't really studied a lot of language before, and so they don't, see it. So yeah, that's where I'm going at the moment.
Okay, well, girls, best of luck with that. Final question: if you could describe your IATEFL experience in 3 words, what would they be?
Lots of drinks. No, that's 4 words.
No, that was 3. Wow, it's quite hard to do. Fun, thought-provoking, and tea.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think on that thirsty or helpful or whatever that was note, we'll finish it there. Ladies, thank you very much for talking to us today. All the best.
Thanks.
Thank you.